When my son Daniel told me, "Stop calling me, Mom. I need space," I didn't understand what he meant. Space from what? From me? I was his mother. I had raised him alone after his father died. I had worked 2 jobs to send him to college. I had been there for every scraped knee, every report card, every disappointment and triumph. And now he wanted space. For days I waited by the phone, thinking he would reach out, that he would call and explain what was wrong, what I had done to upset him. But the phone stayed silent. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It felt like punishment. I kept replaying our last conversation in my mind, searching for clues. Had I said something wrong? Had I asked too many questions about his life, his wife, his work? I tried to fill the quiet by writing in my journal, marking each day he didn't call. Day 1, day 2, day 5, day 10. The numbers grew, and so did the ache in my chest. I would sit at the kitchen table in the morning with my coffee and stare at my phone, willing it to ring. Sometimes I would pick it up just to make sure it was working. I remembered when he was little, how he used to sit beside me on the porch, counting pigeons and laughing at the way they pecked at crumbs. We would make up stories about where they were going, what they were thinking. He had such a big imagination then. He would lean against my shoulder and tell me about his dreams. He wanted to be an astronaut, then a firefighter, then a teacher. That boy was gone now. In his place was a man I barely recognized, a man who couldn't find time for a 5-minute phone call with his own mother. I left him messages, even though he had asked me not to. I couldn't help myself. I kept them short and cheerful, trying not to sound desperate. "Hi, honey, just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Love you." I dropped off a blueberry pie on his birthday, his favorite since he was 6 years old. I left it on his doorstep with a card. He never acknowledged it. I even sent cards for no reason at all, just thinking of you cards with little notes inside. They came back unopened, with return to sender stamped across the front. Each returned card felt like a door slamming in my face. Then one morning, I received an email invitation to a charity dinner at his company. For a moment, my heart lifted. He was reaching out. He wanted me there. But as I read it more carefully, I realized the truth. My name wasn't even in the greeting, it was a group message, and I was just another name on the list. "Dear community members and supporters." That's what it said. I wasn't his mother in that email. I was a community member. That small thing hurt more than I expected. I sat at my computer and cried, something I hadn't allowed myself to do until then. I had been trying so hard to be strong, to give him the space he asked for, to be patient. But patience has limits, and mine were wearing thin. I looked at the old family photo hanging by the hallway and took it down. It was from Daniel's high school graduation. He was wearing his cap and gown, and I was standing beside him with my arm around his shoulders. We were both smiling so wide. I remembered that day clearly. I remembered being so proud, so hopeful for his future. I had believed then that we would always be close, that nothing could come between us. I put the photo in a drawer where I wouldn't have to see it every day. For the first time, I realized love doesn't always fade. It can be pushed away, quietly, one ignored call at a time. It doesn't disappear all at once in a big fight or dramatic moment. It gets chipped away by silence, by distance, by a son who stops seeing his mother as a person and starts seeing her as an obligation he wants to avoid. I thought about calling him again, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? That I was hurt? That I missed him? He already knew that. He just didn't care, or maybe he cared but not enough to do anything about it. Either way, the result was the same. I was alone. That night, I made myself dinner and ate it in front of the television, something I never used to do. I had always believed in sitting at the table, in making meals a moment of calm and gratitude. But there was no one to sit with anymore, and the silence at the table was too heavy. I went to bed early and lay there staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the years I had spent building a life for Daniel, sacrificing my own dreams so he could have his. And this was what I got in return. Space. Distance. Silence. I decided then that I wouldn't keep begging for his attention. I wouldn't keep leaving pies on his doorstep or sending cards that came back unopened. If he wanted space, I would give it to him. But I would also start paying attention to other things. Things I had been too distracted to notice. Things like where all my money was going. A few weeks later, I went to the bank to check on the Bennett family trust. I had started it years ago for Daniel's future, never imagining I would ever need to question it. The trust was supposed to be simple. I contributed to it regularly, and Daniel would have access to it for things like education, starting a business, or buying a home. I had always trusted him to use it wisely, but something had been nagging at me. A few months earlier, I had received a statement in the mail that showed a balance lower than I expected. I had brushed it off at the time, assuming I had miscalculated or forgotten about a withdrawal I had approved. But now, with Daniel cutting me out of his life, I wanted to be sure everything was in order. When the manager showed me the records, I felt sick. Daniel had been making withdrawals I didn't approve, thousands of dollars labeled under fake consulting fees and company names I didn't recognize. Bennett Strategy Solutions. Clearview Partners. I had never heard of these companies. I asked the manager if I had signed off on these transactions. He pulled up the documents and showed them to me. My signature was on several documents, but they weren't mine. I stared at the handwriting and saw the imitation clearly. It was close, but not quite right. The loops were too big. The slant was wrong. Someone had copied my signature, and it didn't take much imagination to figure out who. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My own son had forged my signature. He had stolen from me, not just money but trust. He had taken the thing I had built for him and used it against me. Asked the manager for copies of everything. He hesitated, but I insisted. I told him I would be speaking to a lawyer and that I needed documentation. He printed out the records, and I left the bank with a thick folder under my arm. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table and went through every page. There were so many withdrawals. Some were small, just a few $100s. Others were in the thousands. Together, they added up to a sum that made my stomach turn. I had worked so hard for that money. I had saved every extra dollar, denied myself vacations and new clothes, all so Daniel would have something to fall back on. And he had taken it. Without asking. Without even telling me. I opened my email to distract myself and found one that wasn't meant for me. Daniel had accidentally copied me on a message to his wife, Lauren. The subject line said trust situation. My hands froze on the mouse. I opened it. The email was short, but every word felt like a slap. Daniel wrote about making me seem confused if I ever questioned the money. He suggested that if I started asking questions, they could say I was getting forgetful, that I was losing track of things. Lauren had replied with a single line, "Good idea. Let's be ready." I read it 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. But there was no other way to interpret it. They were planning to discredit me, to make me look like I was losing my mind so they could keep taking money without interference. My hands shook as I read it. I felt anger, but also something deeper. Betrayal. Grief. This was my son. The boy I had raised. The boy I had loved with everything I had. And he was willing to lie about me, to paint me as incompetent just to protect his access to money that wasn't even fully his yet. I sat down and wrote him a letter I never sent. I told him I loved him once enough to trust him with everything, but that love had been used against me. I told him I remembered the boy he used to be, the one who cried when he accidentally stepped on a snail because he didn't want to hurt anything. I asked him what had happened to that boy, where he had gone. But I didn't send it. Words wouldn't fix this. Words wouldn't undo what he had done. That night, I decided to protect what was left of my life's work. I would not let him take anything else from me. I would not let him turn me into a confused old woman who didn't know what she was signing. I called a lawyer first thing in the morning. Her name was Clara, and she had been recommended by a friend. I explained everything to her, showed her the documents, the forged signatures, the email. She listened carefully and took notes. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "You have a strong case, but you need to act quickly." I nodded. I was ready. The next morning, I woke up to a voice message on my phone. It was from someone close to Daniel, a former coworker of his who had always been kind to me. Her voice was low and cautious. She said she didn't want to get involved, but she thought I should know something. She warned me that Daniel and his wife were planning to label me mentally unfit to stop me from interfering with the trust. They were collecting evidence, she said. Little things. Times I had forgotten an appointment. Times I had repeated myself in conversation. They were building a case against me. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the message 3 times. My hands were shaking. I felt afraid, but I also felt something else. Anger. Determination. I knew I had to act. I spent the rest of the morning gathering evidence. I opened every folder, reviewed every transaction, and wrote everything down. There was a withdrawal for $9,400 marked as strategic disbursement. I had never approved that. There were monthly payments of $1,250 to a marketing company called Horizon Creative. I looked it up online. The website was bare, just a single page with a generic logo and no contact information. It barely existed. Then there was a transfer for $24,000 to something called R. Tannen Group. I had no idea what that was. I searched for it online and found nothing. No company by that name. No records. It was as if it didn't exist. I printed every receipt and highlighted them by color. Yellow for suspicious withdrawals. Pink for forged signatures. Blue for companies I couldn't verify. By the time I was done, my dining room table was covered in paper. Clara came to my house that afternoon. I made us tea and spread everything out for her. She went through each document carefully, making notes on a legal pad. She asked me questions about my mental state, about my memory, about whether I had ever authorized any of these transactions. I answered honestly. No, I had not. No, I was not confused. No, I knew exactly what I was looking at. She told me I had enough to demand a full audit of the trust. She said we could file a complaint with the bank and request that all future transactions be frozen until the matter was resolved. She warned me that Daniel would fight back, that this would get ugly. I told her I understood. The bank tried to dismiss my claims at first. When I called, the manager I had spoken to before was suddenly unavailable. I was transferred to someone else, a younger man who spoke to me in a tone that made me feel small. He said that sometimes families have misunderstandings, that perhaps I had simply forgotten approving the transactions. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him that my lawyer would be in touch, and that if the bank did not cooperate, we would be filing a formal complaint. His tone changed immediately. He said he would look into it and get back to me. Within 2 days, Clara received a call from the bank's legal department. They had reviewed the documents and flagged the account. All new transfers were frozen pending investigation. They asked if I would be willing to come in and provide a statement. I agreed. I went to the bank the following Monday. This time, I was treated differently. The manager, who had been unavailable, suddenly appeared. He shook my hand and led me to a private office. He apologized for any confusion and assured me that they took these matters very seriously. I gave my statement. I explained the forged signatures, the fake companies, the email I had accidentally been copied on. They recorded everything. When I left, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also strength. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a confused mother. I was a woman standing up for the truth. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at all the papers spread out before me. I thought about how easy it would have been to ignore the signs, to believe Daniel when he said I was mistaken, to let him paint me as forgetful and incompetent. But I hadn't. I had trusted my own eyes, my own memory, my own sense of what was right. I called Clara and thanked her. She told me we were just getting started, but that I had done the hard part. I had chosen to fight back. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly, but something close. A sense of purpose. A sense that I was not powerless, that I could protect myself and what I had built. And I would. As I sorted through old letters and keepsakes the next day, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a birthday card from Daniel, written when he was 9 years old. The handwriting was careful and a little shaky, the way a child's handwriting is. But it was unmistakably his. The loops, the slant, the way he crossed his T's. I held it up next to one of the forged signatures on the bank forms. It looked almost the same. The adult version was smoother, more confident, but the basic shapes were identical. That hurt more than any insult. My son had used the handwriting I had taught him, the careful letters we had practiced together at the kitchen table, to steal from me. I put the card back in the box and closed it. My grandson Noah came to visit that afternoon. He was 16, tall and quiet with Daniel's dark hair, but a gentleness in his eyes that reminded me of my late husband. He had always been close to me, spending weekends at my house, helping me in the garden, listening to my stories. His easy smile softened the tension in the house. We sat on the porch together, and I made us lemonade. We talked about school, his friends, the upcoming soccer season. He told me about a girl he liked, and I teased him gently the way grandmothers do. For a little while, everything felt normal. But then he grew quiet. He looked at me and said, "Grandma, I know something's going on with you and Dad." I didn't want to burden him, but I also didn't want to lie. I told him the truth, or at least part of it. I explained that I had discovered some problems with the family trust, that his father had made decisions I didn't agree with, and that I had frozen the trust to protect the family's future. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "You did the right thing, Grandma." Those simple words meant more to me than he could know. I reached over and squeezed his hand. A few days later, Daniel came by unannounced. I heard his car in the driveway and watched through the window as he got out and walked toward the door. He didn't knock. He just opened it and came in, his face red with anger. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. I stood up from the couch, but didn't move toward him. I kept my voice calm. "I protected my money." "It's not just your money," he said. "That trust is for me. You set it up for me." "I set it up for your future," I said. "Not so you could steal from it." He called me paranoid. He said I didn't understand how business worked, that the withdrawals were legitimate, that I was making a fool of myself. He called me dramatic, said I was ruining his life, that I was pushing the whole family apart. I looked at him and said quietly, "No, Daniel. You did that yourself." He started to argue, but I walked over to the fireplace. I had placed the copies of the forged documents on the mantel, waiting for this moment. I picked them up and held them in front of him. "These are forgeries," I said. "You copied my signature." His face changed. The anger drained away, replaced by something else. Fear, maybe, or shame. "I had to," he said finally. "You wouldn't have approved those withdrawals." "You're right," I said. "I wouldn't have, because they were theft." I walked over to the fireplace and dropped the papers into the flames. He watched, frozen, as they curled and blackened. Then I told him I had filed legal amendments giving full control of the trust back to me. The bank had already been notified. He no longer had access. He didn't reply. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then he turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He just left, quietly, the way someone leaves when they know they've lost. For the first time, I didn't feel broken, I felt free. I stood at the window and watched his car pull away. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to make him happy, trying to be the mother he needed. I had given him everything I could, and it hadn't been enough. Or maybe it had been too much. Maybe I had made it too easy for him to take from me without thinking about what it cost. Either way, it was over now. I had drawn a line, and I would not cross back over it. That night, Noah called me. He said his father had come home upset and that there had been a big fight between his parents. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was. I asked if he was okay. He said he was too. "Grandma," he said before we hung up, "I'm proud of you." I cried after he got off the phone. But they weren't sad tears. They were something else. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude that at least one person in my family still saw me for who I was. Clara helped me file an emergency injunction that same week. We walked into the courthouse together on a Tuesday morning. I was nervous. I had never been involved in anything legal before, not like this. But Clara was calm and confident, and that helped. I walked up to the clerk's window, holding my folder of evidence. It was thick now, full of highlighted documents, bank statements, and printed emails. The clerk accepted it without question and stamped the papers. By the next morning, the court had ordered the bank to restrict Daniel's access to the trust completely. No withdrawals, no transfers, no exceptions. When I went to the bank again, I noticed how their tone had changed. The same people who once dismissed me as confused now spoke with care and respect. The manager greeted me by name and escorted me personally to a private office. He assured me that the account was secure and that any attempts to access it would be immediately flagged and reported to my lawyer. The money was finally safe. I went home that evening and sat in the quiet of my living room. I looked down at my left hand and saw my wedding ring. I had worn it every day since my husband died 23 years ago. It had become part of me, a reminder of the life we had built together. But suddenly it felt wrong. Like I was still living in the past, still defining myself by the roles I had played for other people. Wife, mother, caretaker. I took off the ring. I cleaned it carefully and placed it on my right hand instead, not for romance but for strength. It felt different there. It felt like mine. I had been many things in life. A wife, a mother, a provider. Now I was myself again. Not someone's wife. Not even someone's mother, at least not in the way I had been before. I was Marjorie Bennett, a woman who had built something and refused to let it be taken from her. I sat by the window and watched the sun go down, feeling a quiet kind of victory. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming who I was before they decided I was too old to matter. The next few weeks were surprisingly peaceful. Daniel didn't contact me. I didn't contact him. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't the painful, desperate silence of before. It was simply the absence of a relationship that no longer existed. I started going through the rest of my finances, making sure everything was in order. I updated my passwords, reviewed my accounts, checked my credit report. I wanted to be sure there were no other surprises waiting for me. I also started thinking about the future. What did I want my life to look like now? For so long, I had oriented everything around Daniel. My hopes, my plans, my savings. Now I had to build something new, something just for me. I began volunteering at the local library, something I had always wanted to do, but never had time for. I joined a book club. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Small things, but they felt significant. They felt like steps toward a life that belonged to me. One afternoon, Clara called to tell me that the bank's internal investigation had confirmed the forgeries. They were cooperating fully and had agreed to restore the withdrawn funds to the trust as part of their liability. It wasn't all of it, but it was most. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. Children were playing on the sidewalk. A neighbor was walking her dog. The world kept moving, the way it always did. And so would I. Weeks passed, and I started to feel peace again. Not the fragile, hopeful peace I had tried to hold on to before, but something more solid. Something earned. I opened my drawer of keepsakes one morning and found new purpose in them. The birthday cards from Noah, the drawings he had made me as a child, the photos of us together in the garden. These were the things that mattered. Not the money. Not the trust. The relationships that were real. I decided to update my will. I called Clara and made an appointment. When I sat down in her office, I told her I wanted to transfer the trust benefits to Noah instead of Daniel. Not all at once, of course. Noah was still young, but in stages as he grew older and proved himself responsible. I wanted to invest in the one person who still saw me with love and honesty. Clara helped me draft the documents. We set up conditions. Noah would receive access to portions of the trust at specific ages, 21, 25, 30. Each portion would come with a letter from me, guidance on how to use it wisely, and what it represented. I felt good about this decision. It felt right. Later that week, Noah came over for dinner. We cooked together, something we had always enjoyed. I taught him how to make my mother's meatloaf, the recipe she had taught me when I was his age. He wrote down the ingredients carefully in a notebook. After dinner, I gave him a blank journal. It had a green leather cover and empty cream-colored pages. I told him, "This is your homework legacy. Fill it with lessons you'll never forget." He smiled and flipped through the pages. "What should I write?" he asked. "Anything you learn that you think matters," I said. "Things you want to remember. Things you want to teach your own children someday." He promised he would. I saw hope in his eyes, the kind of hope that comes from being seen and valued. I began writing again, too. Not just in my journal, but something more public. I wrote an article for the local paper. The editor was someone I knew from church, and when I pitched the idea to her, she was immediately interested. I titled it, "To the Children Who Forgot Their Parents." It wasn't angry, just honest. I wrote about what it feels like to be pushed aside, to have your love treated as an inconvenience, to watch your child become someone you don't recognize. I wrote about the importance of honoring the people who raised you, even when life gets busy, even when relationships are complicated. The piece was published on a Sunday. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing. People from all over town called to thank me. Letters poured in from strangers thanking me for speaking what they couldn't say. Some of them shared their own stories, their own experiences of being forgotten by children they had sacrificed everything for. One woman wrote to say she had called her mother for the first time in 2 years after reading my article. Another man said he had driven 3 hours to visit his father that same day. The responses overwhelmed me. I hadn't expected my words to touch so many people. Noah was proud. He came over with a copy of the newspaper and said, "Grandma, your words helped people." I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just pride, but purpose. For so long, I had measured my worth by how well I took care of others. But now I was doing something different. I was using my voice. I was telling the truth. For the first time, silence no longer hurt, it felt like peace. I started writing more. Essays about aging, about loss, about resilience. Some of them were published. Others I kept for myself. But the act of writing, of putting my thoughts into words, gave me a sense of control I had been missing. Noah and I grew closer during this time. He came over more often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help me with projects around the house. We painted the fence together. We cleaned out the garage. We planted new flowers in the garden. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "I'm sorry about my dad." "It's not your fault," I told him. "I know," he said, "but I'm still sorry. You deserve better." I reached over and hugged him. He was almost as tall as me now, but in that moment he felt like the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him stories. "You're a good person, Noah," I said. "Don't ever forget that." He nodded. We sat together in comfortable silence, and I realized that this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation, not guilt, just love. One quiet afternoon in early fall, I heard a knock on my door. I looked through the window and saw Daniel standing there. He wasn't angry this time. He looked tired and older somehow, his shoulders slumped, his face drawn. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in right away. We stood there looking at each other for a long moment. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him enter. We sat in the living room, the same room where we had fought months earlier. But the atmosphere was different now. The anger was gone, replaced by something quieter. Sadness, maybe. Or regret. He didn't come to ask for money. He came to admit what he had done. He confessed to the lies and the withdrawals. He told me he had been under pressure at work, that his company was struggling, that he had made bad decisions trying to keep everything afloat. He said he had convinced himself that the money was his anyway, that he was just accessing it a little early. But he knew that wasn't true. He knew he had stolen from me. He knew he had forged my signature and planned to discredit me if I found out. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said finally. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying to face what I did." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, to pull him into a hug and tell him everything would be okay. That was the mother in me, the part that had spent his whole life protecting him from consequences. But I couldn't do that. Not this time. "I appreciate your honesty," I said. "But trust is something earned slowly. You broke something between us, Daniel. I don't know if it can be fixed." He nodded. He looked like he might cry, but he didn't. He just sat there with his hands folded in his lap. "I understand," he said. We talked for a little while longer. I asked about Noah, about Lauren, about his work. He answered my questions, but didn't offer much beyond that. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back and said, "I love you, Mom. I know I haven't shown it, but I do." "I love you too," I said, because it was true. Love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you. It just changes shape. After he left, I realized that inheritance isn't just money. It's truth, memory, and the courage to face what's broken. I couldn't give Daniel access to the trust again. Not now, maybe not ever. But I could give him the truth. I could refuse to pretend that what he did was acceptable, and I could also refuse to hate him for it. That evening, I asked Clara to prepare a letter for Noah. I wanted to write him something he could keep, something that would guide him as he grew older. I wrote about honesty, about integrity, about the importance of treating people with respect even when it's difficult. I wrote about the mistakes I had made and the lessons I had learned. I told him to live with honesty and never let guilt control his choices. Clara sealed the letter and filed it with the trust documents. Noah would receive it when he turned 21, along with the first portion of his inheritance. My relationship with Daniel remains quiet. We talk occasionally, brief conversations that are polite but distant. He has not asked for the trust to be reinstated, and I have not offered. Maybe someday things will change between us. Maybe they won't. I've made peace with either possibility. But with Noah, the relationship grows stronger. He comes over every week. We cook together, work in the garden, talk about his dreams for the future. I see in him the kind of person I tried to raise Daniel to be. Kind, honest, thoughtful. And I am grateful. I've started publishing essays under my full name, Marjorie Bennett. Some of them appear in the local paper. Others I submit to magazines and online journals. Not all of them are accepted, but enough are that I feel like I'm building something. A voice. A legacy that isn't measured in dollars, but in words and ideas. For years, I was only a mother in someone else's story. I was the supporting character, the one who existed to make someone else's life possible. But now, I am the author of my own story. I decide what happens next. I decide what matters. I survived silence, betrayal, and shame, and came out whole again. Some mornings, I wake up and feel the weight of everything that happened. The loss of the relationship I thought I had with my son. The betrayal. The loneliness. But then I get up, make my coffee, and sit down at my desk to write. I look out the window at the garden Noah and I planted together, at the flowers that are blooming despite the changing season. And I remember that I am still here, still standing, still capable of building something beautiful. That is enough.